welcome back to another episode of the One Tree Hill Rewatch here on the Filmaholic channel. I'm Matthew. If you haven't checked out any of our other videos, go check them out. We have all sorts of different videos throughout the week, including my One Tree Hill Rewatch, which I'm usually putting on the weekends. In the future, I want to transition to that. Right now, it's kind of all over the place, but if you haven't caught up, go catch up. We have a behind-the-scenes video that I did last weekend in Wilmington, where we went and did a tour of the filming locations. A self-guided tour. I took Sarah on the tour because I actually went and watched filming a lot when the show was actually happening, so I know where a lot of stuff are. And I was actually an extra on the show too. So yeah, I'm gonna give some behind-the-scenes input throughout this rewatch, mainly when we get into season 5 and 6 and beyond, because that's when I started going to Wilmington and being involved with the show to an extent. But right now we're on season 3. We're in the middle of season 3 right now on this rewatch. We're starting with episode 9, talking about episode 9 through 12 today. But yeah, I'm gonna crack open this beer here and drink that while I'm talking to you guys. This beer, actually, if you guys are a fan of beer, highly recommend going to Wrightsville Beach Brewery in in Wilmington. If you ever go to visit the sets of One Tree Hill, it's an excellent place. They got some good food and some really good beer, especially this one here, which to me tastes like Fruity Pebbles. So yeah, definitely check it out. Even have a glass from the brewery. Anyways, okay, so we're starting with the mid-season finale of season 3 today, and that is episode 309, How Resurrection Really Feels. This episode aired December 7th, 2005. Now remember, if you watched the other videos leading up to this season started later in the year than a lot of the other seasons, and that's why we don't have as many episodes the first half of the season as some of the other seasons. You would have between 10 and 12 episodes in your first half of the season. There's only one other season, I think, and that's season 1, that has 9 episodes the first half of the season. So we get into season 3 here, 9 episodes first half of the season. This mid-season finale is directed by Greg Prange, who, like I mentioned before, directs all the big episodes. Of course, he's coming in to direct the mid-season finale, and is written by Mark Schwann, the creator of the show. Now, this is also election day in Tree Hill, so this puts a pretty big mark on the timeline of when this episode actually takes place, and that would be the first Tuesday following, well, if you look at the dates, that Tuesday, because this is to be 2005-2006, their senior year, this would have to be like, I think it was November 8th, I was looking on the calendar, so the second Tuesday in November, because the first Tuesday was the first day in November back in 2005. So this episode takes place in November to me, and puts a good timeline of puts a good mark on the timeline of where this episode takes place and where in the season we are. So it's election day. Dan and Karen are going at each other to determine the winner. Negative ads have been ran about Dan because he assaulted Nathan in the locker room. But then Dan has this video that he found that shows that Keith was buying the same bottle of alcohol that Dan had when the dealership fire happened. So he obviously thinks Keith is the one that tried to kill him, and that's a big part of the season and the show moving forward. And he tells Karen about it, who contacts Keith and asks him. Now, Keith's not in this episode physically. He will come back by the time we're done with this episode today. But yeah, so that's a big thing, and it's a burden on Karen, because did he really try to do it? And she wants to protect Keith, obviously. But it's really Deb. We do know that. We do find that out in this episode. Lucas, who did see Deb there, he obviously saved Dan from the fire. He confronts Deb later in the episode and gives her the piece of paper that he has that she left for Dan. And, he lets her know this is the only bit of evidence that can trace this back to you, which ends up, Deb leaves Tree Hill at the end of this episode. Now, she does have one more episode coming up in the next, the mid-season premiere, where she tells Nathan the truth, and we'll get to that in a second, but this causes her to leave. And also, the election's over, so the divorce is really going to happen with her and Dan now, because he signed the papers and he did agree to it, as long as, you know, she waited until after the elections, and that happens. Obviously, the episode starts with Brooke, Peyton, and Haley getting arrested. Brooke and Peyton sold her clothes that she designed from Suburban Filth in the end of the last episode, and now they came and arrested her, and they caught Haley wearing one of the shirts, so she's arrested too. I liked this. I thought it was a good little intro, little bit of the episode, and I really loved the mugshots, and I thought that was great. Chris loses the money that Nathan gave him for Haley's album too, so Nathan and Chris have to go and gamble on a riverboat in this episode, which is really funny. Little extra time to spend with Nathan and Chris and their relationship, and obviously Chris ends up getting punched in the face several times, like he should, and it's really because, and Chris has been awful this season, just like he was in last season, and I hate stuff with him and Brooke. I hate that happened and everything, but this episode here, I think, is when and they kind of lay the groundwork as far as like his relationship with Nathan and Haley to Chris changing. And as we move from this episode and Chris in the future, his character stays true to Chris Keller, but he's not the bad guy anymore. You see that he actually has a heart, that there's something there. And you see it in this episode. I don't feel it that much because of the whole Brooke thing that I really don't like, but the groundwork is laid there. You know, Dan has that video of the scotch. He's still determined to find out who tried to kill him. And ultimately, the episode ends with him winning. He becomes mayor of Tree Hill, which was an interesting way to go on the show. I like that. I really wish I could get a sign that says Dan Scott for mayor, one of those props. That would have been awesome. I wonder who out there has that prop, because I would love to get my hands on it. Brooke and Lucas, we continue with their relationship. It's not very good right now because of her sleeping with Chris and him being really mean to her. And I mean, it's deserved because of what she did, but you know, she does make some points like, you know, look how you treated me when we were in a relationship, but he also points out I didn't sleep with someone else, so it's got a point there. But obviously the episode ends with them finally getting together and being in a real relationship and done with this non-exclusive bullshit, and her giving him the letters that she wrote for him over the summer, which will continue throughout the season of him responding to those letters. Would have been interesting to find out what the letters said, what he said back to her. Never will find out. I'm sure nothing was even written, but it'd be cool to know. And then the final two things about this episode. One, Peyton is seeing her mind. She's like imagining that evil side of her, that dark ghost, the angel of death, and which I really like. I love how they shot that. I love the angel of death thing. I thought it looked awesome. But it's really like her guilt over Ellie and wanting to, you know, go and have some sort of relationship with Ellie because she feels the guilt of sending her away, and how much she feels towards Ellie, but still wanting to get to know her. And I'm glad they did explore that relationship, and that was one of the best parts of the season, I think. And then finally, the last thing is that Nathan and Haley finally get back together in this episode. This is like the start of that. Like, they don't move in together in this episode, but this is when they sleep together again, and probably when Jamie was conceived, if you really think about it in the timeline. I know we have the whole pregnancy scare, well, not pregnancy scare, but Nathan's scared about it in an upcoming episode, and, you know, they blow it off like she's not pregnant, but if you look at the timeline, like, she had to have got pregnant around this time, just like Karen has to get pregnant pretty soon for that to happen. So that's pretty much how Resurrection really feels. Really good episode, one of my favorites of the season. And it's a mid-season finale that doesn't have like huge cliffhangers, but it's a very satisfying mid-season finale. And I think that's the most you can ask for, is to be satisfied with a mid-season finale. I'd rather have one like this that ties a lot of stuff up but still leaves open possibilities, but it's just a really good written episode, versus something like, I'm going to throw an example out. I know I talk about season 8 all the time and how I'm not really a big fan of season 8, but season 8, the mid-season finale, is like awesome, a big like action kind of heavy or whatever, but it's not very good. It's got some, I don't know, might have a couple good scenes in it, but we'll talk about that when we get there. The next episode is 310, which is the mid-season premiere, and it's called Brave New World. It originally aired January 11th, 2005, which I'm actually a little bit surprised. There's only about a month gap there, which usually they do come back in January, but it's usually later in January. So they came back, I feel like it's usually later in January. They came back a little early this year, January 11th, 2006, sorry. And it was directed by John Asher. This is his third episode, and it's written by John A. Norris, the second of 11 episodes that he'll end up doing throughout the show. And John A. Norris would actually later produce seasons 6 through 8. And possibly more. I've started learning that not everything on IMDb is reliable, because then I watch episodes that I've already like written here about, and turns out the person that says only produced certain episodes directed more. So just know that John A. Norris is a producer on the show at some point. This is, like I said, mid-season premiere, and it's actually my least favorite episode of season 3. It's not a bad episode, but it's okay. It's my least favorite episode of the season. But season 3 itself is very strong, so that's, not saying it's bad. Lucas goes with Peyton in this episode to see Ellie. That was an agreement that he made with her, that if she ever wanted to go see Ellie, he would go with her, which causes some tension right off the bat with him and Brooke, because, they just got together, now he's going off with Peyton, which they get past it, but it's not a good way to start the relationship. But so he goes with her, but when he gets there, she wants to see Ellie on her own. Like, she just needed Lucas to get there. Okay, I get it. So she goes and sees Ellie, and then spends the episode trying to convince Ellie to help her put out an album, which is a benefit album. And they end up getting an argument at first because Peyton looks around the house, and they're having a good bonding time, but then Peyton looks around the house and notices there's no food in the kitchen, and assumes that Ellie has just came there to die, which isn't the case. That's just how Ellie lives. And so Ellie gets upset about it, and they end up going separate ways until the last end of the episode, obviously, when then Ellie shows up and agrees to, do the album with Peyton after she's listened to Haley's song. So they're going to work on it, putting an album out together, which is really ambitious for a high schooler. But I thought it was a good storyline, and it was a good album actually too, because they actually released this album. This was the second One Tree Hill album they put out. The first album was a combination of music from season 1 and 2, and it was just like a soundtrack to the show. This album was just for season 3, and it was Friends with Benefits. That's what the album was called, and it was really good. And I believe the proceeds actually did go, or at least part of the proceeds go to the Breast Cancer Foundation. I'm not sure. They would also later go on in season 4 to put out another album. This was the third album, and it was okay too. I mean, I liked all these albums because I liked the music from the show a lot. Lindsay Washington, who's the music coordinator, is amazing. If I ever do a show, I definitely want her on there. That'd be a part of it. I wish they had done another couple albums throughout the rest of the series, because there was a lot of good music in the later years too that they could have heavily went into, with Kate Vogel and Grubbs, and more stuff with Beth and Joy Lenz, even in the final season with Chris Keller or Tyler Hilton. But I guess I don't really know what the purpose of them not doing it was. Maybe it was budget or whatever. But anyways, this brings me back, and I know I mentioned this in another episode as well, something I'm not a big fan of, and that's like characters get brought in for one episode and you don't see them again. And they did it with Mal's grandpa in an earlier episode, which that one I was fine with. I said I like that one. This one's the first one I want to talk about that I really don't like, and that's a character called Faith they bring in this episode that was a past really good friend of Lucas, and he spends the episode playing basketball with, and we're catching up with Faith. I don't like this because, for one, we've never heard of her, and we never hear of her again. Bothers me. Like, if they were such good friends, why have I not heard of her? And even if you haven't, even if you bring her in, there's just small things that bothered me. There was no mention of Haley, like how was Haley or anything. Haley's been Lucas's best friend since they were kids. So obviously Faith and Haley would have been friends too and would have spent a lot of time together. And there's just no mention of that. Sometimes when they bring in stuff like this and talk about characters' backstories from, when they were younger, it feels like to me it's contradiction what I believe happened with the character and what you've really set up in the past already, and I don't like that. Just like the fact that apparently she was there Lucas's freshman year of high school and then left. So obviously Lucas and Haley would have been best friends then. And they talk about Brooke, and I'm like, I don't really know if Lucas and Brooke I don't feel like they met at all before season 1. And I really don't think she was there in a group of people making fun of Lucas, because I didn't get that vibe from anything, at this point in the show. So that bothers me. But yeah, just in general, wasn't impressed with that part of the episode, didn't like it. Brooke also spends the episode, her website has went online, and people are buying her dresses, and she doesn't have enough dresses to sell. So she's getting all these people, Haley, Mouth, Rachel even comes, to make her own dress, but Beth and a bunch of kids to start making these dresses for her, and that she ends up shutting it all down because the way she's treating people is not good, and she realizes that. That was okay. Once again, nothing special to me. Mouth and Rachel, this is where we get the first seeds of that friendship that grows into a big thing throughout the season and into season 4, the friendship with Mouth and Rachel, and obviously causing friction between Brooke and Mouth and their friendship, which I did not, I've been rewatching this season and I'm further ahead than what I'm actually recording, and I did not realize how many times Brooke and Mouth fight in this season. Like, damn, they're not dating, they're friends. Like, what's going on? Why are you guys fighting so much? This is ridiculous. But like I said, also, this is Deb's last episode for a while until we get towards the end of the season. She's left Tree Hill and calls Nathan and admits to Nathan the truth about Dan, who obviously gets upset about it at first, but then it seems like they're okay by the time he leaves in the end of the episode. She tells another story, and this is another thing, like I said, I don't like the backstories because it contradicts how I see the characters' backstories, and she tells this story about Dan threatening to kill her in the past, and I don't think Dan would have done that. It doesn't speak to the character that I feel like he is. And you can point to other examples later in shows, but I feel like I'll say they all had motivation of why he acted like that. If you let's go back to season 1 Dan. Do I believe that Dan there, because this Dan would have been before him, would have threatened to kill Deb? No, I don't. I don't believe that, and I feel like it was just an added thing to try to make the audience care about Deb more and give more justification for her trying to kill him. Which sometimes you don't need that. You don't. I don't need you to force me to feel sympathetic for this character. I feel a certain way already. Some characters are flawed, and you leave it at that. The last thing about this episode, Lucas takes Brooke to the river court and plays a game on the river court for the first time. Now this, as well as the Faith thing, does tie into one thing that I do like. It starts to lay the groundwork of the Jimmy Edwards thing that we're going to get to later in the season. And that's stuff from his past that he's moved on without and left in the dust, kind of coming back. Because we know that with Jimmy Edwards, they were friends, but they got lost along the way. And Faith tells Lucas that. She's like, who's standing up for those people like you stood up for me back then? So I feel like that was the only reason her character was actually written in the show. And it doesn't make sense. I just wish they had done it better, honestly. The next episode is 311, Return of the Future. This episode aired January 18th, 2006. It was directed by Bethany Rooney, who directed 4 episodes. This is the third of her 4 episodes. And was written by Terrence Culley, and it's his 5th episode. I remember at the time that they had trailers or previews coming out, and they kept saying the biggest return to Tree Hill, and people were speculating who it be, whether it be Keith, Felix, Jake, who was the return of Tree Hill going to be. Obviously it was Keith. This was a good episode, solid episode. They lose another game, basketball game. The season's not going well, so Whitey ends up taking them to their new gym, which they'll play throughout season 3. And I don't really know the reasoning behind this. I would like to know. If anyone knows, put it in the comments, please. Was there any behind the scenes reasons they actually went to this new gym and stopped filming at the old gym, or was it really a story move completely? I kind of feel like, and I'm not sure exactly yet, and I'll wait till we get to season 4. I think they switched basketball gyms throughout the show. I want to say that the original gym was the gym that they had been playing at originally, like the first 3 seasons up until this point. And then I think they went to this old gym, and then when they go back to their gym, Tree Hill Gym, it's actually filmed at a different school, I think. And I think maybe they ran into some issues filming there, and then they did this, and then they picked another school and tried to make it look the same. Because the gym they actually film at, I know in season 5 and whatnot, is not the same gym they filmed at in season 1. It's just definitely not. It looks completely different. So I wonder what the real story behind that is. Dan causes problems for Naylee in this episode, obviously with the pregnancy stuff, scaring Nathan to believe that Haley didn't take birth control on purpose. Brooke gets into rogue vogue in this episode. She thinks it's Lucas at first, and then she finds out it's Rachel who has the motivation to make her go to rogue vogue so she can miss the cheerleading competition, which comes in later in the season. Dan and Keith, they reunite in this episode, and obviously Dan thinks Keith tried to kill him. This is the first episode that he's had with Keith since Keith got back from the whole Jules thing. So some really, really good written episode, moments in this episode with Dan and Keith. I love their scenes together. They have such good on-screen chemistry together. That's one of the things after the season that I miss a lot. Every time you get a scene with Dan and Keith, it's gold. Paul Johansson and Craig Sheffer were awesome. And Dan's kind of threatening Keith, but then Keith kind of threatens Dan back. If you ever touch Lucas again, you'll wish I killed you. Love that. And then at the end of the episode, Keith is arrested right when him and Karen kiss, who their relationship's going full steam ahead. As soon as he gets back, she's missed him, she's regretted not having that relationship with him. He loves Karen. Their relationship starts going full steam ahead. But obviously this was intentional too, because of what they had planned with Keith pretty soon in 316, and this is 311, so they have to pretty much rush it. So that was 311, and then we get to 312, the last episode I'm going to talk about here on the video, and it's called I've Got Dreams to Remember. This aired January 25th, 2006, and was directed by Stuart Gillard. The first of his episodes through season 6. He directs the episodes through season 6, and he actually directs one episode per season from season 3 to season 6. And it was written by Mike Hero and David Strauss, who, like I said, two of my favorite writers on the show, even though they wrote my least favorite episode. They write some really good stuff. And I really like this episode. This episode, nothing huge happens, but it's one of my favorite episodes of the season because it's just the story in it. It's, all the characters are going to the guidance counselor to talk about their future, and I loved it. I loved the dialogue. I loved the back and forth between the guidance counselor and the characters, getting to know the characters' thoughts, with them pretty much talking straight to us, but talking to the guidance counselor in this way, and it really works for me. Keith and Dan, their relationship further in this episode. Keith's in jail at the beginning. His comedic chops in this episode is fantastic. So is Dan's. And then, obviously, Keith and Karen go on a date in this episode, and Dan's reaction to that. Obviously, he's hurt, but he's not going to show it. And Mouth and Brooke argue again about Rachel, which happens multiple times throughout the season. Basketball scout shows up at the school, but Nathan can't play in the game because he skipped class because Dan was there, and Whitey will not let him play in the game, which is unfortunate. But Nathan ends up helping Lucas out, giving him a tip, and Lucas shows really good potential for the Scout, and the Scout is really impressed. But then at the end of the episode, when Nathan comes and talks to Whitey's like, you gave Lucas a good tip. That was part of being a team, and I'm gonna make sure that Scout comes back. But Nathan's like, can you make sure that a Scout from Stanford shows up, not just Duke, because him and Haley determining what school they're gonna go to. And the episode ends with a scene where Dan's in the car, and I remember as a kid watching this and not really understanding, but which is funny now. But Dan's in the car in the rain, watching Lucas, Karen, and Keith have dinner, and then Keith excuses himself and comes out the back way of Karen's cafe and sneaks up on Dan and says, "I hope you have your pants on." Didn't understand this as a kid, but it really was a good scene though, because you see Dan looking at what he could have had, the family he could have had, both like with Lucas and Karen, but also with Dan and Deb, really. And he messed that up too. He had a second chance there with another family, and he still messed that up. But this is going back to the beginning, the family that he originally could have had, and now his brother, who he thinks tried to kill him, has now assumed that role, that father figure role, in that life. And really, I like these moments because they really dive into Dan's mind and what he is experiencing. That'll take us into more episodes in the future and better to understand this character. And the fact that Keith kind of knows, too, how Dan is sort of feeling at this moment, but he's made bad decisions, and that's his to live with. All right, guys, that's the 4 episodes I'm talking about today. We'll have another episode out for you soon. Check back, and we'll see you guys next time.